America is not a patriarchy. Why do you think that, Bonji?
I believe that America is not a patriarchy because for a country to be considered a patriarchy, one thing that it would one thing that it would have to fall under it would have to fall under the standpoint of blatant blatant oppression and suppression of women in the favor of men. That's how I recall the definition being. We can look up the definition, or you can do it while you're on stream. I can't do it because my hands are full right now. But essentially, when we're talking about a patriarchy, we're talking about a blatant system that is put in place to purposefully subject women under a level of suppression, whereas men are put in the higher position, usually speaking. Um, when we're talking about America, I will 100% agree with you that yes, we were a patriarchy once upon a time. Currently, hell no, because the way that we have had so many let's look at affirmative action, for example, right? You and I both know that affirmative action was not originally a race-based thing. It was originally a gender-based thing. It was for women to be put in colleges and institutions, just be able to fill in that gap. A lot of women who benefited off of these things, predominantly white women. I don't mean to make that race distinction, but it must be made, and we're going to be honest with how we're characterizing this, right? There are a multitude of cases where we can see that legally and societally, there have been a plethora of change that has been put in place in order to level the playing field between men and women. And the progress that we're in now, we have a multitude of women in power. Arguably, one of a couple, few of the most uh, well known, but also the most hated politicians in our cabinet right now, two of which AOC and Kamala Harris, right? They're still a part of politics and they still have a very, very prominent amount of power. I don't think if we're talking about a patriarchy, a legitimate patriarchy, not how leftists like to categorize what a patriarchy is, a legitimate patriarchy, there's no way you could look at me with a straight face and say that we live in a patriarchy after you got those two in power, right? As well
Hmm.
as multitudes of institutions and systems and corporations that are female ran.
Would you
You know,
say a fair characterization of what a patriarchy is that it is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it?
you just read off that definition, didn't you?
Of course. I'm saying, do you find
Yes,
that to
I
be a
fully
fair
agree with that.
definition?
That is the definition that I find most consistent with it.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, in the context that we're, I mean, we could be talking about for example, a tribal society of like the eldest male, for instance. We're not talking about
Mhm.
that,
Yeah, we're
right?
not talking about that.
Um, okay, so would you say that most leaders in the United States are male?
Vast majority of them, yes.
Okay. What do you think, like, the percentage is? Like, if you had to just like guess off the top of your head, like,
We're talking political power, right?
yeah, yeah, or like, I mean, executives. It could be, leadership roles, if you will.
I'd say definitely somewhere between like 70 and 80%.
70, 80% men.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
Okay. What do you
Is that
think? I
accurate?
mean, like, what would you say that the percentage of population of men to women in the United States are?
It's dead split.
Okay. So, do you think that, given the fact that leadership roles is 70 to 80% men in all forms of leadership, um, and given the fact that men tend to hang out with other men and women tend to hang out with other women, do you think that our society could have an aspect of patriarchy?
No,
Okay, how so?
because a patriarchy isn't determined by how much men are in power, right? Ideally, in a patriarchy, there will be no women in power whatsoever, right? And then on top of that, you don't have a lot of women who are even pursuing these positions of power as much as men are, right? Now we can get into an argument about how that might be a societal issue, whatever the case may be. Me personally, I could give fuck all about that. I don't care about societal perception. What I'm more focused on is the fact that, like what was brought up in the previous debate, is that women have the ability to be able to pursue those things if they wanted to, and there are multiple women who are in those positions to even pursue those things. 100%. So when we're talking about when we're talking about what would be consistent with the patriarchy, I wouldn't argue that what would be consistent with a patriarchy is how many men are in those certain positions of power. I would argue, are women able to get in those positions of power if they were to hypothetically pursue that goal? And the answer is yes. They do have that ability to do so.
Okay. Do would you say that men do like to hang out with other men?
Yeah, just like women like to hang out with other women.
Yeah. Okay. And so, would you say that in the past, most men were in leadership roles?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, if most men are in leadership roles, would you say that like mingling with people in leadership roles give you a higher probability of getting into a leadership role?
Just being around men in general, would that give you a
No,
more
no,
high
being around
high
other
probability?
leaders.
Being around other leaders?
Yeah, would get you. It would give you a higher probability of getting into a leadership role.
It depends, but let's say yes for the sake of it.
You don't think that it it depends how?
I think it varies. I think it definitely varies. I don't think it automatically increases your chance, but I think it varies. It can, but that all depend. That's all. This that's a separate conversation, but I think that's all dependent on how good you're at basic leadership skills like negotiation, assertiveness, so on and so forth.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, I wouldn't disagree with you that men, because they tend to be more aggressive due to testosterone, that they are likely to end up in a leadership role over a female. But that would also argue in my favor that women are largely excluded from leadership roles. I mean, I'm glad that we can bring up people like AOC and and Kamala Harris as like a potential person, but I mean, it is true that most, even by your thoughts, right, just by thinking about it, most leaders are men.
Yes, most leaders are men.
Yeah.
Now, if most of the leaders were women, does that mean that it's indicative of a matriarchy?
Yes.
How so?
Because most leaders would be women.
But definitionally, and by
Like if
definitionally,
society was
I mean in the
excluding men
definition
from
you read out.
leadership roles, I mean, I would be like, why is this that case? I can lead.
Yeah, but do you think that society is largely excluding women from that role? Because I could give you a modern day example. We could talk about Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, it's no secret. I live here. I
Who's
live in
Gretchen? Wait,
Detroit.
who's Gretchen Whitmer?
Bullshit, Amanda. You don't know who Governor Gretchen Whitmer is.
I'm
You don't know who that is?
I'm surprisingly stupid.
She's the governor of Detroit, not Detroit. She's the governor of Michigan. She's been a governor of Michigan
Well,
for like
how
the
am I
past.
supposed to know that? I mean, I'm in Florida. I know Ron DeSantis.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. God bless you with that.
It's bad. It's bad, bro.
I know, I know,
They
I
made,
know.
dude. You don't understand.
So bad.
They
Godly.
made PragerU actual fucking like course material for fucking for elementary and middle school. It's acceptable course material. PragerU.
I mean, skill issue. I guess.
Bro, we're like 40. We're like 48th in terms of like our total education.
You give it to
It's
PragerU. That's
bad.
insane.
It's bad, bro. And we just fucking handed the keys over to PragerU. Fucking. All right. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm off
But
topic.
yeah, yeah. So like Gretchen Whitmer, president of not president, governor of Michigan, and she's been governor of Michigan for the past, I want to say maybe like 6 to 8 years.
Uh-huh.
She got elected when I was in high school. I want to say it was probably like 10th grade when she got elected. Um, so given her track record, and I have nothing against Gretchen Whitmer. I think she's been a fairly acceptable governor, especially compared to our previous governor, Rick Schneider. Nobody liked him, by the way. Um, I think that with positions of power, it's more indicative with what you bring to the table. Do you bring, do you actually bring a level of change to the table that could, you know, that could result in the betterment of the society that you live in? And I personally believe that she is an example of that. I don't think she was I don't think she was elected, at least not for the most part. I don't think that she was elected because she was a woman, right? And
Mhm.
definitely not because she would be the first woman, because she wasn't. That was Jennifer Granholm. But the the issue that I often run into, at least with this argument, is that we need this representation simply because, we need more women in power, or we need more women representation. I'm like, hey, that sounds fine, but if you end up shooting yourself in the foot trying to get this female representation in in uh in these positions, right, then what do you have to say then? Because you can't just your only motivation can't be, well, she's a woman, therefore I'm going to vote for her, or she's a woman, therefore she deserves the spot, right? There has to be a level of intellect that's there. She has to be able to prove herself that she can hang with the big dogs, right? And there are a lot of big dogs, men and women, in politics, some of which are corrupt, but are still in that position of power because they earned it, right? Not because they were a diversity hire. And I don't think that I think that if we were 100% in the patriarchy, like no doubt about it, this wouldn't even be a conversation right now. The thought of a woman being in a position of power would be laughable.
Well, I mean,
No doubt in my mind.
okay, fair enough, right? I understand that, like, we're not the 1920s, right? But you did agree earlier that it's that a patriarchy is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. And you also
Yeah.
agreed that men tend to hang out with men and women tend to hang out with other women. And you also agreed that if you want to be a leader, hanging out with other leaders will cause you. So if most of them are men, then it is a large. It's going to be very likely that women would be excluded. Therefore, is this patriarchy?
No,
Okay, why not?
because the you're so you're going off of the largely part, right? Which, granted, I can respect that. I can understand that standpoint of which you're coming from. From the standpoint of the how patriarchy is not only it being definitionally consistent, but also how it's been executed, right? This sounds like a deflection, so you might have me here. But how it's been how it's been executed on a systemic level, right? there have been there are multiple cases, not even only in America, but also across the globe, right, where it's not based off of how much hold, or how much of a grasp you have on certain positions, right? It's not based off of how many people in power that you know. Just by virtue of the fact of you being a woman, there's no shot in hell you would even be included in the conversation, right? For a patriarchy to be consistent with what a patriarchy is, women would have to technically be treated in a lesser margin, right? For a patriarchy to be what a patriarchy is, women would basically be the equivalent to children almost, right? Some of which would consider it as property, right? And like I mentioned earlier, even the thought of a woman being in a position of power would not only be laughable, right? But in a patriarchy, it would be believed that that would just make society worse, right? There's no way it would make sense to put a woman in a position of power, because uh why would we want to look at to look at this from an emotional standpoint. Why would we want to, whatever sort of misogynistic argument that you could think of would probably be a justifying standpoint for why we would need a patriarchy, right? Whereas with now, we moved outside of that.
Okay.
Whereas with now,
Maybe it'll.
we don't need to operate in that standpoint.
So maybe okay. How about this? Um, I think.
Let me know when you upload this so I can listen back to it
Yeah.
and find out how shit I
So
was.
I'll give you. Yeah. Sure. I'll give you a hot. Just subscribe to me on YouTube. Normally I post like one video a day, and then I usually get about 3 or 4 out, and so you'll see next day, the next day, the next day. Anyway, so let's say, for example, okay, all right, maybe this will help. I think that patriarchies naturally happen. Not because there's like any like terrible actors, but because like it is natural that it happens. Does that mean therefore we should do the patriarchy or push the patriarchy? No, but I also think it's natural that it happens. I don't know if I like, okay, so I'm trying to like argue with you about how there is in fact a patriarchy, right? And I'm saying that like given the variables that I have, it appears to be that way. And I'm not saying that men are bad, right? For having the patriarchy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you agreed with all of my propositions, which would lead to a patriarchy, right? And so, yes, you are correct. I am leaning on the largely excluded, right? So that means it's possible for a woman to be a leader. But like, given that the demographics are, it's not 60-40, right? It's not, 55-45. It's 70-30, right? Like kind of what you pointed out, right? I mean, that's just from your own intuition.
Wouldn't you argue that that's wouldn't you argue that that's kind of what would happen if we do have certain if we do have positions of powers that are earned via God damn it, she fucked me up.
Natural means?
When you just by something like intellect, that would be something that would happen.
No,
Say
well, the reality is that men tend to be more aggressive. Men's brains are wired to be more aggressive. Testosterone makes you more aggressive. This is true. There's no we cannot argue against this, right? And so if that is in fact the case, that men tend to be more aggressive, then therefore it's quite common that in order to possess a leadership role and maintain that leadership role, you kind of have to be a little bit more aggressive. Okay. And so if that is what is necessary in the job, because men tend to be more aggressive, this means that more men end up in areas of power. However, this again still argues in favor of a patriarchy. Like, does that mean that we should like operate our systems in such a way where it doesn't reward being aggressive? Sure, maybe. I mean, there are societies that don't like overly aggressive people, right? Like, I know Japan is not in favor of that. Like, if you're an aggressive person as a leader, you're not a leader for very long. Does that make sense?
I mean, yes and no, but I mean, like mentioned earlier, it's kind of from the standpoint of, for something to be considered a patriarchy, right? We can't base it off of male and female nature, like how we men and women tend to act in a disproportionate way. I would argue that it would have to be based off of how the system is structured, and if the system is structured purposefully to put men and women in differing spots and levels, then yeah, you could definitely make the argument that we live in a patriarchy. But like I said, my justification of it is that we can't necessarily argue that America is a patriarchy if women have that opportunity, right? And especially when we're talking about a meritocracy, which I believe America to be. I believe that we are a meritocracy, or ideally that's what we should be. And I think that's what, for the majority of time, we've been pursuing, not the majority of time, for say around post civil rights movement up till now. That's what we've been pursuing is a meritocratic America. I don't think that would necessarily be indicative of a patriarchy if that's something that a country is pursuing, especially given the track record of other countries as well, third world especially.
Well, if you agree that men tend to hang out with other men, and women like to hang out with other women, and in the past it was largely men that has held positions of power as well. Men tend to be more aggressive, which is actually quite beneficial to being a leader. Then we would have to agree that men are included and women are largely excluded from this leadership role. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a woman couldn't potentially lead or that they're not allowed to lead, but it would be patriarchal in that sense. Maybe a soft patriarchy, if you will. Does that follow, I guess?
If by soft patriarchy you mean, and this is kind of what I do argue a lot, America isn't really a patriarchy, but America definitely still has that patriarchal tendency in some areas. Is that a middle ground that we can reach in?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. All right. We went past your 7 minutes. Get the fuck out of here, bro. Get your editing. I want to see this. I want to see this, bro. I want to see how bad I did.
That was a good talk, man. I really enjoyed that.
It's a great talk. All right, man. I'm gonna let you go.
So, all right,
bye,
man,
Chad.
It was really nice talking to you, buddy, man. That was great.
Yeah,
fabulous.
I'll definitely jump in next time I see you in here.
Yep. You have right. I mean, I'm here all the time, so if you ever want to talk, then I'm here.
For sure.
Yep. Good talk.
All right. Yep.